The year was 1883, and Wyoming was a furnace. The sun was not a grace. It was a judgment. A white-hot eye that bleached the sky and baked the soil into red. Cracked plates, dust, finer than any flour, rose inconstant, shifting curtains with the hot wind. It was the taste of the air, the grit between the teeth, the film on the water bucket. Above, a scattering of crows, black as burnt cinders, rode the thermals. They were waiting. The land always waited. It was a hard, high desert country that demanded everything a person had, and then, often as not, it took that, too. Mara Klein was intimately familiar with its demands. She stood by the silent windmill, her hand resting on the dry, sun-warmed wood. A year had passed since Silas's death, but the word widow still felt like a stranger's coat, ill-fitting and heavy. She was slender, a woman who looked as if she'd been carved from willow, but the prairie had tempered her. There was a resilience in the set of her jaw, a tensile strength in the way she held her shoulders. Her farm was dying. The 40 acres Silas had claimed were thirsty, and the creek was down to a muddy ribbon. The windmill, their mechanical hope, was broken. A vane had splintered in a windstorm 2 months back, and the gearbox was seized. She had tried. She had climbed the rickety tower herself, her hands raw and bleeding, trying to make sense of the iron teeth. But it was men's work, heavy and unyielding. She was alone, and the town of Redemption Creek watched her. She felt their eyes when she rode in for supplies. The town, such as it was, a single dusty street with a mercantile, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a church, thrived on speculation, and Mara Klein was its most reliable subject. The whispers followed her like the red dust. The women, gathered by the bolts of calico in the mercantile, spoke in low, righteous tones. "Bad luck, that one," they'd murmur, heads close together. "Never could keep a child in her belly, and then couldn't keep her husband from the earth." Silas's death in the coal mine collapse had been ruled an accident, but the town preferred its own versions. "Wore him down," the preacher's wife had opined. "A man needs softness in a wife, not flint." The men looked at her with a different kind of speculation. They saw the land, the house, and the woman, all unattended. They saw her eyes, gray as a winter sky, and found them unsettling. "Got too strong a gaze," they'd say over warm beer. "Looks right through a man, measures him." In their world, a woman alone was either a burden to be pitied or an opportunity to be taken. Mara felt the weight of these judgments as she walked back from the failed windmill to the sod house. It was a small, low structure, cut from the earth itself. It was suffocating in the summer, but it was hers. It was all that was left. Tacked to the rough-hewn plank of her door, a white square of paper fluttered in the hot breeze. It was not a letter from back east. It was official. Her heart, which had felt dull and heavy, gave a sharp, painful kick. She pulled the nail free. She unfolded the paper from the county assessor's office. Her eyes scanned the neat, looped script. The words were simple, legal, and absolute. Delinquent. Unpaid property taxes. Silas had handled the taxes. He had always handled the money, the bank, the town business. He had been chasing a seam of coal, promising it would make them rich, promising it would get them out of this dust bowl. The paper informed her that the debt was now 6 months past due. The county, in its bureaucratic mercy, granted her 10 days, after which the property would be seized and sold at public auction to the highest bidder. She sank onto the small bench by the door, the paper crushing in her fist. 10 days. It was the sound of a trap springing shut. The sky, the dust, the waiting crows, they all seemed to lean in closer. The next morning, she hitched up the mule. Obadiah. She couldn't spare the energy for grief. Grief was a luxury. This was survival. She rode the 5 miles into Redemption Creek, the sun already a hammer. She tied Obadiah outside the small clapboard building that served as the town hall. the land office, and the sheriff's lockup. Mr. Agnew, the clerk, was a dry man with a green eyeshade and ink stains on his cuffs. He looked up, his expression one of practiced pity. Mrs. Klein, a sad business. Mr. Agnew, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She placed the notice on his desk. I need an extension. I can't pay this. Not now. The well is nearly dry. The windmill is broken. If I can just get to the harvest. The harvest? Agnew pushed his spectacles up his nose. Mara, Mrs. Klein, your corn is ankle-high and burning up. There will be no harvest. He turned the paper around, tapping it. The law is the law. The county has been more than patient, given your circumstances. The taxes are due. They must be paid. You are giving me 10 days. The county is giving you 10 days. He corrected gently. I am just the messenger. I'm sorry. There is nothing I can do. Desperation clawed at her throat. Please, just until the fall. I cannot. His voice was final. She turned, her body stiff, and walked out into the blinding street. She felt dizzy, the dust and the heat pressing in. She was halfway to her mule when a shadow fell over her. A difficult day, Mara. She smelled him before she saw him. Whiskey, horse sweat, and the expensive tobacco he smoked. Lyle Horn. He was a large man, broad in the shoulder and soft in the belly. He owned the vast horn spread that bordered her meager 40 acres. He had been Silas's partner in the mining venture, the one who had funded the equipment, the one who hadn't been in the shaft that day. Lyle, she acknowledged, her voice flat and cold. I was just in with Agnew, he said, gesturing to the office with his chin. He had a gold tooth that flashed when he smiled, which he was doing now. Heard the unfortunate news. A terrible shame. This is hard country for a man, let alone a woman on her own. I am managing, she said, pulling on her worn gloves. Are you? He stepped closer, invading her space. She had to tilt her head back to look at him, and she hated it. Fact is, Silas, God rest his soul, he owed me. That mine was a bad investment. He put this farm up as collateral for the timber and the drills. I hold the note. Mara, I could have taken this place the day after the funeral. What do you want, Lyle? She asked, her voice quiet and dangerous. I'm a compassionate man, he said, spreading his hands. I'd hate to see you put out on the road. This little patch of dirt, it's not worth much, but it does square off my south pasture nicely. I'm prepared to be generous. I am not selling. He chuckled, a low, wet sound. I'm not talking about a sale. I'm talking about an accommodation. You're a young woman. You have needs. I have needs. He reached out and, before she could move, his thick thumb brushed the line of her jaw. She recoiled as if he'd struck her. Don't touch me. His eyes went cold. The manufactured kindness vanished. You're in no position to be proud. Widow, I am offering you a roof over your head. I'll pay the county tax. You can stay in the house. All I ask is a little companionship, a little gratitude for my generosity. The air thickened. The street, which had been bustling, seemed to go silent. She could feel the eyes from the mercantile, the saloon. He was offering to make her his whore, in all but name. Bile rose in her throat, hot and bitter. I would rather burn the house down myself. Lyle's face darkened with color. You've got 10 days. Mara, 10 days to find your senses. Or perhaps I'll just wait for the auction. I'll get the land either way. This way just seemed warmer for us both. He tipped his hat, the gesture a mockery, and sauntered across the street toward the saloon, his spurs ringing with victory. Mara fumbled with Obadiah's reins, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unloop them from the hitching post. She climbed onto the mule's back and kicked it into a trot, not caring about the dust she raised. She rode out of town, shame and rage burning behind her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give him, or this town, the satisfaction. She was nearly home, at the dry creek bed that marked the edge of her property, when she saw him. A man was standing by the near side of the old wooden bridge. He was a stranger. She would have known him otherwise. He was tall, and where Lyle Horn was built of soft bulk, this man was lean, all rawhide and bone. He was leading a big roan horse that favored its left foreleg. The man himself was coated in the fine red dust of a long journey, his duster hanging open, his hat pulled low. He didn't move as she approached, just watched her come. He was looking at the bridge, not at her. Mara pulled Obadiah to a stop. "Bridge is rotten," the man said. His voice was rough, like stones dragging in a dry wash. "It's all I have," Mara replied, her own voice still sharp with the acid of her encounter with Lyle. The man finally looked up. His eyes were dark, shadowed by the brim of his hat. He was younger than his voice, but not young. He had a scar, a thin white line that ran from his left temple down to the edge of his cheekbone. It was an old wound. "Weston Hale," he said. It wasn't an introduction, just a statement of fact. "Mara Klein." She returned. She nudged Obadiah forward. The mule stepped onto the first plank, and the wood groaned. Splintering under its hoof, the animal snorted, pulling back. Before Mara could react, Hale moved. He wasn't fast, just sudden. He had the mule's bridle in his hand, his grip firm. "Easy, now," he murmured to the animal. Not to her. He tested the next plank with his boot. "It'll hold you, but not the horse." He looked at his roan. "Not him." He calmly led Obadiah across, his boots finding the supports under the rotten planks, guiding the mule with a steady, confident hand. When they reached the solid earth on the other side, he released the bridle. "Much obliged," she said stiffly. He just nodded, turning his attention back to his horse. He ran a hand down the animal's foreleg. Mara started to ride on, but she paused. She looked west. The sky was no longer white-hot. It had taken on a sickly, yellow-brown pallor. The air was unnervingly still. "A storm is coming," she said. "I see it," he replied, not looking at her. "A duster, a bad one." He shrugged, a minimal movement. "Been in 'em before." "It'll strip the hide from you. Your horse is already lame. It won't make it through." He was silent. He was a man cornered, and she recognized the look. It was a quieter version of the one she saw in her own mirror. "You can shelter in my barn," she heard herself say. The words were out before she could consider them. The town's whispers. Keeping strange men. Lyle Horn's leering face. But then she looked at the bruised, angry sky. He finally raised his head, and his gaze met hers. It was heavy, assessing. It wasn't hungry, like Lyle's. It was just tired. "I don't take charity, ma'am," he said. "It's not charity," she snapped. "It's a trade. That barn will keep the wind off you. My house will keep the dust out. You stay. You work." His eyes moved past her, to the homestead. He saw the broken windmill, its single damaged vane hanging like a broken wing. "What's the work?" "The windmill. It's broken. The gearbox." "I know my way around machinery," he said. "I can fix it, if you've got the tools." "I have Silas's tools." She hesitated. "I can offer shelter and supper. I can't pay you wages." "Supper and a dry roof for the horse is fair payment." "The barn is over the rise," she said, pointing. "There's hay and a water trough. The well by the house pulls slow, but it's wet." "Appreciate it, Mrs. Klein." He tipped his hat, but he didn't follow her. He waited until she was a good 50 yards toward the house before he picked up his roan's rein and began the slow, limping walk toward the barn. He was a man who understood boundaries. An hour later, the world ended. The wind didn't rise, it struck. A solid wall of red grit slammed into the sod house, and the sky went black. It was not darkness, but a suffocating, roaring brown. The sound was a freight train, 1,000 screaming animals. Mara shoved rags into the cracks around the single window and the door, but the fine, silt-like dust seeped in anyway. It coated the table, the blankets, the inside of her mouth. She sat in the gloom, listening to the house groan. She thought of the man in the barn, if the roof held, if he was smart enough to get the horses into the most sheltered stall. She thought of her 10 days. She thought of Lyle Horn, safe in his large, timber-framed house in town. The storm raged for hours. When it finally broke, it was full night. The wind didn't stop, but it lessened to a mournful, abrasive howl. The air was still thick with dust. She lit the kerosene lamp, the small, greasy flame casting huge, unsettling shadows in the one-room house. She stirred the pot of beans she'd had simmering on the cold stove. They were gritty, but they were hot. A solid knock came at the door. She froze. "Who is it?" "Hale." The voice was muffled by the wind. "Storm's past its worst, if that supper offer still stands." She pulled the bar back from the door. He stood there, a ghost made of red dirt. He'd taken his hat off, and his dark hair was matted. He had a lantern in his hand, and he looked impossibly large in the small doorway. "Come in," she said. "Wipe your feet, though it's a fool's errand tonight." He stepped inside, ducking his head. He brought the cold and the smell of the dust with him. He moved with a deliberate quiet, as if he was in a church. He placed his lantern by the door. "The barn held," he said, his voice low. "Your mule is fine. My roan is settled. I braced that windmill tower. The vane is split, but I can mend it. The gearbox is seized, just like you said. I'll need grease and daylight." "I have axle grease." "That'll do." She gestured to the table. "It's just beans and bacon, and it's probably got grit in it." "Food is food, ma'am. Thank you." They sat opposite each other at the small, rough table. The only sounds were the scraping of spoons on the tin plates and the relentless whine of the wind outside. The silence in the room was heavy, heavier than the storm. She hadn't sat at this table with a man since Silas. Silas had been a talker. He filled silences with big dreams, with promises of silver and coal, with laughter. This man, Weston Hale, was the silence itself. He ate steadily, carefully, like a man who hadn't had a hot meal in a long time but was determined not to show it. She watched him over the rim of her tin cup. The lamplight was kind to him, softening the harsh lines of his face, but it deepened the shadows in his eyes, and it illuminated the scar. It was clean, old, and not from a razor. He caught her looking. She didn't look away, but he was the first to speak. "This is hard land you've got." "It is," she agreed. "Harder for a woman alone." Her spine stiffened. It was what Lyle had said. "I manage." He didn't reply. His gaze dropped, not to her face, but to her hands, which were curled around her cup on the table. Mara glanced down at them. They were not pretty. The skin was chapped and red, the knuckles swollen. Her nails were broken, crescent moons of dirt beneath them. A blister from the well pump had broken on her palm, raw and red. They were the hands of a field worker, not a wife. "I see that," Weston Hale said quietly. She looked up, surprised. There was no pity in his voice. There was no condescension, no hunger. It was a simple observation. He wasn't Lyle Horn, seeing weakness. He wasn't the town, seeing misfortune. He was just seeing. He saw her hands, and he understood what they meant. For the first time that day, the knot of panic in her chest eased. Just a fraction. "You're looking for land?" she asked. "That's the plan. There's none left here. Not that's worth having. Unless you've got money to buy out ranchers like Lyle Horn." He grunted, a non-committal sound. He pushed his plate back. The meal finished. "That was the best meal I've had in a month, Mrs. Klein. I'm obliged." He stood up, and the room seemed to shrink again. He picked up his lantern. "I'll be in the barn. First light, I'll start on that gearbox." He was at the door, his hand on the latch, when she spoke. "Mr. Hale." He paused, turning his head. "Why are you here?" she asked. It was a stupid question. He'd told her, the storm, but she meant here, in Wyoming, in this dust. He looked at her for a long moment. The kerosene lamp flame guttered in a draft, and the shadows danced. His dark eyes seemed to hold all the weariness of the road. She saw a flicker of something in them, something she recognized. It was the look of a man who had been pushed to his last square. "I was in Texas," he said, his voice so low she barely heard him. The land there has a memory. I was looking for a place that had forgotten." He didn't say goodnight. He just opened the door, stepped out into the howling, dusty dark, and pulled it shut behind him. Mara sat at the table for a long time. The house was quiet again, but the silence was different. It was no longer empty. She looked at her own hands, the ones he had noticed. They were raw and they were calloused. They were the hands of a woman who had 9 days left, but as she stared at them, she curled them slowly into fists. The morning broke scrubbed and raw. The storm had passed, leaving the air tasting of wet minerals and silence. Weston Hale was up before the sun had cleared the eastern bluffs, his body moving with the ingrained economy of a man accustomed to hard labor. He was in the barn, his hands gentle on his roan's leg. The limp was easing. He'd found a small stone, sharp as glass, lodged deep in the frog. He dug it out, cleaned the wound, and applied a poultice of chewed tobacco leaf. The horse would mend. He turned his attention to the farm. He began with the windmill tower, using the nails he'd bought to secure the loose cross braces. He climbed the lattice, the wood groaning under his weight. From the top, he could see the entirety of Mara's 40 acres. It was a bleak picture. The corn was withered, the creek bed a pale, sandy scar. The only patch of green was the small kitchen garden by the house, which he must have kept alive with water hauled by hand. He saw her emerge from the sod house. She didn't look up at him. She moved with a weary purpose, heading straight for the mule, Obadiah. She led the animal not to the broken windmill, but to the secondary well, the one near the house. It was fitted with a simple, heavy bucket and pulley system. Weston watched her. She hauled, emptied, and hauled again, filling the trough for the mule and then her own water buckets. It was slow, back-breaking work. He understood now why her hands looked the way they did. Weston spent the next 3 hours fighting the windmill. He mended the splintered vane with tin scraps from Silas's workshop and wrapped it with baling wire. The gearbox was the true enemy. It was rusted shut, a solid block of iron. He used the axle grease and a heavy mallet, striking the gear housing with rhythmic, measured blows. It was a stubborn, unforgiving task. Mara worked on the fence line bordering the dry creek. He watched her reset a post, using a heavy tamping bar to pack the earth, her slender body straining with the effort. She knew how to work. She understood leverage, and she didn't quit. He had seen women on the frontier, women who crumbled under the weight of it, and women who hardened into something brittle and cruel. Mara Klein was neither. She was like the willow switches that grew by the creek, bending under the wind, refusing to snap. And she was desperately alone. He saw it in the way she braced her own weight against the fence post, with no one to hold the other side. He heard it in the quiet, practical way she spoke to the mule, not as a pet, but as the only living thing that would listen. The loneliness on this farm was a physical presence, as real as the dust. It was a cold sheet hanging in the air. Late in the morning, with a final, jarring crack of the mallet, the gearbox coupling broke free. He worked the mechanism back and forth, slathering it in grease, until the gears meshed smoothly. He reattached the vane, climbed down, and pulled the tail boom to catch the morning breeze. There was a hesitant squeak, a groan, and then a rhythmic clank, clank, clank. The long sucker rod began to move. Minutes later, a thin, beautiful stream of dark water gushed from the pipe into the empty stone cistern. He heard a small sound and turned. Mara was standing 10 yards away, her hands pressed to her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. She wasn't making a sound, but she was crying, the tears cutting clean paths through the dust on her face. She didn't wipe them away. She just stared at the water as if it were a miracle. Weston found he didn't know where to look. He turned back to the tower, pretending to check the bolts. "It'll pump slow till the seals swell," he called out, his voice gruff. "But it'll hold." He couldn't stay. The intimacy of her gratitude was more unsettling than the storm. "I'm riding to town," he announced, wiping grease from his hands onto an old rag. "My horse needs a proper shoeing. I'll need nails if I'm to fix that gate." She finally looked at him, her gray eyes raw. I have no money. I can't pay for a smith." "He's my horse, ma'am, my responsibility. I'll be back before dark." He saddled the roan and rode out, the steady sound of the windmill, clank, 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 following him down the trail. Redemption Creek was exactly as he'd left it, only now it baked in the full light of day. He tied the roan outside the blacksmith's shed. The smith, a barrel-chested man with arms like smoked hams, nodded at the horse. "Be an hour. Cost you $1. "Just the shoe," Weston said. "I'll wait." An hour in Redemption Creek was a long time. He had $25 in his pocket, meant for the nails. He could stand by the forge, or he could get the measure of the town. He walked into the Last Chance Saloon. It was noon, and the place was quiet, holding its breath for the evening rush. Only 4 men were inside. The bartender, cleaning glasses, 2 dusty ranch hands playing cards. And in the far corner, holding court at a table by himself, sat Lyle Horn. Weston walked to the bar, put a nickel on the wood, and ordered a beer. The bartender served him without a word. The air was thick with the smell of stale whiskey and judgment. "Well, look at that," one of the card players said, his voice loud enough to carry, "It's the widow's new hand." Weston took a slow drink of the warm, flat beer. He didn't turn. "Heard you're staying out at the Klein place. Stranger," the other hand chimed in. "You getting paid in coin, or other favors?" The first man chuckled, a dry, barking sound. Weston set his beer down. He turned, leaning his back against the bar. He looked at the 2 men. His gaze was flat, heavy. It held no anger, just an immense, tired weight. The card player, emboldened by the beer, grinned. "What's the matter? Friend, she's bad luck. That one. Poison. Silas Klein found that out. Went and blew his brains out in the barn. He did. Couldn't stand being married to her another day." "That's not what happened." Weston said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "Oh, yeah, and you'd know?" "I know she's a woman working 40 acres by herself, while men like you sit in here swapping spit." The man's grin vanished. He started to stand up, his hand dropping toward his hip. "I wouldn't," Weston said. He hadn't moved. His duster was pushed back, his own gun belt resting easy on his hips. He just looked at the man, and the man suddenly found his chair more comfortable. Now, boys." Lyle Horn's voice boomed across the room, full of false cheer. He stood and walked over, placing a heavy hand on the card player's shoulder, pushing him back down. "No need for unpleasantness. The man's just working." Horn turned his smile on Weston. It was all gold tooth and assessing eyes. "Weston Hale, isn't it? Heard you rode in from Texas. I'm Lyle Horn. I'm a friend of Mara's, a neighbor. She hasn't mentioned you." Weston said. Horn's smile tightened. "Mara's particular. She's had a hard time. In fact, I've been trying my level best to help her. That land's too much for her. It's going up for auction. You know, county's taking it for back taxes." "I heard," Weston said. "Fact is, a man like you could do well," Horn said, lowering his voice. "A conspirator. You're living in her barn. You're fixing her windmill. You're already halfway there. A woman like that, she gets desperate. She'll sign that land right over to a man who makes her feel safe." He winked. "You could have the whole place for yourself by the end of the week. Cut me in, say, for 20%, and I'll even make sure no one else bids against you at the auction." The proposition hung in the foul air. He was offering Weston a chance to do exactly what the town already accused him of. Weston looked at Lyle Horn. He saw the soft belly, the expensive hat, the satisfied cruelty of a man who had never had to fight for anything but his own profit. He felt a slow, cold anger rise in his gut. It was an ancient, familiar feeling. It was the injustice of it. This woman was drowning, and this man was standing on the bank, offering to sell her the water. "I'm here for nails," Weston said. He pushed his empty beer glass away, turned his back on Horn, and walked out of the saloon. The silence he left behind was absolute. He got the nails, paid the blacksmith, and rode out of Redemption Creek, feeling the burn of Horn's gaze on his back. He knew he'd made an enemy. He also knew he didn't care. When he returned, the cistern by the windmill was nearly full. Mara had already opened the sluice gate, and a muddy trickle of water was making its way down the irrigation ditch toward the scorched corn. It might not save the crop, but it was a fight. They ate supper in the same charged silence of the night before, but it was different. The shared knowledge of the windmill, the water, had changed the air. The grit from the storm was gone. The house was clean. After the beans and cornbread, Mara did not let the silence settle. She rose and, from a small wooden box under her cot, she pulled a dark green bottle. It was 3/4 full of amber liquid. "Silas, my husband?" "He kept this for a special occasion," she said, her voice quiet. "He was waiting to strike coal. I reckon a working windmill is occasion enough." She brought 2 tin cups. She didn't have glasses. She poured a measure in each, the whiskey smelling sharp and smoky. She handed one to him and sat back down. Not at the table, but on the small stool by the hearth. The fire was low, casting a warm, orange glow. Weston took the cup and sat in the only other chair, the one Silas used to sit in. They drank. The whiskey was raw, burning a path down his throat, but it was warm. "The town," Mara said, staring into the flames. "They talked about me." It wasn't a question. "They did." "What did they say?" "They said you were bad luck. They said your husband killed himself because of you." She flinched, a small, sharp movement, but she didn't look up. "And what did you say?" "I said they were small men." She was quiet for a long time, turning the cup in her calloused hands. "They're wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He didn't kill himself because of me. He killed himself because of what he did." Weston waited. He knew this was a threshold. "Silas wasn't a bad man," she began, her voice gaining a desperate, pleading strength. "He was just weak. He wanted things. He wanted to be a big man, like Lyle Horn. Lyle funded the mine. You know, it was Silas's claim, but Lyle's money, Lyle owned him." She took a ragged breath. "The town thinks he died in the mine collapse. He didn't. He and his friend, Jebediah, were in the shaft when the timbers gave way. They were trapped, not by the main collapse, but in a small pocket. When the rescue party found them 2 days later, Jeb was dead. His skull was crushed by a beam. Silas had a broken arm." She looked up at Weston, her gray eyes vast and haunted, swimming in the firelight. "Everyone said he was lucky. A miracle. Silas said Jeb was killed instantly. But he wasn't. Weston said—" She shook her head, a tear tracing the same path as the one that morning. When I was washing him, Before the funeral, I looked at his hands. They were raw, torn down to the meat. He'd been digging, trying to get out. And then I looked at Silas's boots. He always wore those heavy mining boots. She stopped, choking on the words. There was skin under the heel, Jeb's skin, from his face. Weston closed his eyes. The space was small, she whispered, the story pouring out of her like poison from a wound. When the timbers cracked, there was only room for one man to get clear. Silas. He pushed him. He shoved Jeb into the path of the falling rock, and then he sat there, in the dark, for 2 days. Next to the man he'd murdered. He lived with that for 1 week. He sat in that chair you're in, and he didn't eat. He just stared. And then I found him in the barn. He'd used his own belt. He took the coward's way out. And he left me here. The confession hung in the small, warm room. Devastating and absolute. She was finally crying openly. Her body hunched over. The grief of a year finally breaking free. Weston didn't move. He didn't offer comfort. He just sat, a witness. He knew better than anyone what it was to live with a ghost you'd made yourself. We all have our ghosts. Mrs. Klein, he said, his voice rough. She looked up, her face wet. You say that, but you don't know. Don't I? He touched the scar on his temple. This isn't my ghost. This was just a careless bullet. He took a long drink of the whiskey, finishing the cup. My ghost doesn't leave a mark. He stared into the fire, and he was no longer in the sod house. He was back in Texas, in the high, dry heat of the Llano Estacado. I was a soldier. After the war, we were called peacekeepers, but we were just clearing the land, moving the Comanche. It was ugly work. His voice went flat, all the life draining out of it. We hit a village at dawn. We were told it was a warrior camp. We were told to clear it. We came in shooting. It was chaos, fire and smoke. I saw movement. A bundle of blankets by a teepee. I thought it was a warrior, reaching for a rifle. He paused, his hand tightening on the empty cup. I fired. It's what we were trained to do. I didn't wait. It wasn't a warrior. It was a child, a girl, maybe 6 years old. She'd just been hiding. She'd been asleep. Mara's breath hitched. I looked at what I'd done, and I just dropped my rifle. I turned around, and I walked away. Right out of the fight. I didn't look back. I just walked. I've been walking ever since. A deserter. I'm not looking for land. Mrs. Klein. I'm looking for a place where a man like me can be forgotten. We can't be forgotten, Mara said, her voice thick. We just are. The room was silent, save for the pop and hiss of the fire. They were two people, hollowed out by their pasts, their terrible secrets laid bare on the floor between them. They were the same. The wind began to rise outside. It was a low, mournful sound, not the violence of the night before, but a slow, creeping whine. It found the cracks in the sod house, and the lamp flame flickered. Mara stood up. She was unsteady. From the whiskey, from the confession. She took a step toward the fire, as if for warmth, and swayed. Weston stood, his hand out, ready to steady her. She didn't stumble. She stopped, right in front of him. She was so close he could smell the whiskey on her breath, the faint scent of lye soap from her skin. She looked up at him, and her eyes were not haunted anymore. They were just empty and desperate. It was the most profound loneliness he had ever seen. It was his own loneliness, staring back at him from a woman's face. Slowly, as if in a trance, she raised her hand and laid it on his chest. It was a small, light touch, but it felt like a brand through his shirt. He could feel the calluses on her palm. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. She leaned in. It wasn't a seduction. It was a collapse. It was the simple, desperate gravity of one human being seeking warmth from another. The wind howled, a sudden, violent gust that rattled the door in its frame. The air in the room went tight. He could feel the heat of her, the small, frail life in her, and a fierce, sudden wave of desire washed over him. It was sharp and hot and undeniable. It was a longing to forget the cold, to forget the dead child, to lose himself in something living. His hands came up. He was going to pull her in. He was going to take what she was offering. But as his hands touched her shoulders, he stopped. He saw her face, the vulnerability, the shame that was already creeping into her eyes, the fear of being rejected. He saw Silas, and he saw Lyle Horn. He saw the card player in the saloon. They were all men who took. He was not going to be one of them. His grip on her shoulders firmed. It was not a hold of passion, but of support. He gently, deliberately, pushed her back. She let out a small, broken sound, a gasp of humiliation. "No," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it. He held her there, at arm's length, forcing her to meet his gaze. The firelight flickered across the scar on his face. "Not because we're lonely," he said, his voice low and absolute, barely louder than the rising wind. "Not because of the whiskey, and not because of the ghosts." He held her eyes, branding his words onto her. "If I do this, Mara, if I touch you, it's because I mean to stay." Weston's words. "It's because I mean to stay." Changed the air in the sod house. They were a promise, but they felt more like a judgment. After he left, Mara sat by the cold fire, her shame from the rejection warring with the terrifying shock of his statement. He had seen her at her lowest, her most desperate, and he had not taken advantage. Instead, he had offered her something far more complicated. He had offered her his presence. The next morning, he was not a guest. He was a fixture. He rose before her, coffee already boiling when she woke. And he went to work. He was no longer just mending. He was fortifying. He restrung the barbed wire on the north fence. He used Silas's old tools to rehang the barn door, which had always sagged. His movements were deliberate, measured. He was a man claiming territory. He was staying. News of the working windmill and of the drifter who had fixed it traveled to Redemption Creek as fast as the dust. Lyle Horn heard it in the Last Chance saloon. He had been humiliated, turned down by the widow and then ignored by her new hired hand. Now, that hand was making the property viable. A working well changed the value of those 40 acres. It changed the math. He left the saloon and walked across the street to Mr. Agnew's office. The clerk looked up, his green eyeshade casting a sickly pallor on his face. "Horn, what can I do for you?" "That Klein property," Lyle said, not bothering with pleasantries. He placed his thick hands on Agnew's desk. "That notice you sent, 10 days, it said." "That's correct. The county auction is set. She has, let's see, 8 days left to pay the delinquent tax." "I want it moved up," Lyle said. Agnew paled. "Moved up? I can't do that. The law is the law. 10 days' notice." "The law," Lyle sneered, leaning in, "is what men with money say it is. I am the largest taxpayer in this county. I am also the man who holds the note on your own house. Agnew, you find a way. Find a new regulation. A sanitation code she's violating. I don't care. Or just shorten the notice. I want that land on the block by the end of the week." I can't just—" "You will." Lyle straightened up. "And while you're at it, you'll start spreading the word." "Spreading what word?" "The truth." Lyle smiled, his gold tooth glinting. "That the grieving widow Klein isn't so grieving. That she's taken in a strange man, a drifter, a deserter. From what I hear, she's keeping him in her house, violating every standard of decency. A woman like that, she's a stain on this town. She doesn't deserve to own land here." Agnew swallowed, his gaze dropping to his ink-stained blotter. I'll see what I can find in the ledgers. Lyle, you do that." The poison spread instantly. It was what the town had been waiting to believe. The whispers Mara had endured before were nothing. Now, the speculation became fact. The judgment became condemnation. Mara felt it 2 days later. She had to go to town for salt and flour. Weston offered to go. His eyes were hard. "They won't trouble me." "No," Mara said, her chin set. She was terrified, but she would not be a prisoner on her own farm. "It's my name they're soiling. I'll not hide from it." She rode Obadiah down the main street. It was as if a cold wind had blown ahead of her. The men standing outside the saloon stopped talking. They just turned and stared, their expressions a mixture of contempt and a new, ugly curiosity. When she stepped into the mercantile, the women gathered by the fabric bolts went silent. Mrs. Abernathy, the preacher's wife, physically pulled her daughter away, as if Mara carried the pox. Mr. Henderson, who had known her since she was a girl, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Flour and salt," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the silent room. "Your credit is closed, Mrs. Klein," he said, his voice flat. "Cash only." "Since when?" "Since this morning." She felt the blood rush to her face. She placed the coins on the counter, took her goods, and walked out, her back rigid, feeling the 20 pairs of eyes drilling into her. When she returned, the first true attack had come. Nailed to her gatepost was a dead raven, its neck broken, its black wings spread in a mockery of flight. Weston saw it first. He was waiting for her, his face a mask of granite. He ripped the bird from the post with one bare hand and threw it into the gully. He said nothing. His silence was more violent than any curse. The next day, the violence escalated. Mara was inside, kneading bread, when a shadow passed the window, followed by the crash of glass. A fist-sized rock, sharp and gray, landed on the floor, skidding to a stop by the hearth. Weston burst in from the barn, his rifle in his hand. "Are you hurt?" She was standing, white-knuckled, staring at the rock, her hands covered in flour. "No," she whispered. He ran outside, but there was no one, just the sound of hoofbeats, already distant, and a cloud of red dust settling on the horizon. Weston spent the rest of the afternoon boarding up the window. The house, already dark, became a little more like a tomb. The air was thick with what was unsaid. They were under siege. They woke the next morning to the smell. It was sharp, resinous, and foul. Pine tar. Weston went out first. Mara followed him. She stopped at the gate, her hand flying to her mouth, a small, strangled sound catching in her throat. Smeared across the rough wood of the gate, in thick, glistening, black letters, were 2 words. "Widow whore." Mara felt her knees buckle. This was not a rock. This was not a dead bird. This was an execution of her character. They had taken her name, her last possession, and murdered it. Weston looked at the words. He looked at Mara, her face ashen, her body trembling, and something inside him, a cold, tightly coiled spring of rage that he had lived with since Texas, finally snapped. "Stay in the house," he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Bar the door. Do not open it." "Weston," she pleaded. "Don't! It's what they want!" He didn't listen. He strode to the roan, swung himself onto its bare back, and kicked the horse into a gallop. He rode toward Redemption Creek, a lone, dark figure of vengeance, his face set, his mind cold and clear. He rode straight to the Last Chance Saloon. He didn't hitch the horse. He swung off and stalked inside, his spurs ringing in the sudden quiet. It was mid-morning. The usual loafers were there, the 2 card players from before, Slevin and a man named Cobb, 3 other ranch hands, drinking off the night's pay. Weston stood in the doorway, blocking the light. His rage was a palpable thing, sucking the air from the room. "Who was it?" he asked. His voice was not loud. It was deadly. The men looked at their drinks. The bartender paused, a rag in his hand. I asked, Weston said, stepping into the room. Who wrote on her gate? Slevin, the card player, was drunk and brave. He gave a short, barking laugh. What's it to you, drifter? She hire you to protect her honor? What's left of it? Slevin stood up, unsteady, his hand on his belt. I hear she's welcoming all comers. Widow whore seems about right. Maybe I'll pay a visit, Misa. He never finished the word. Weston crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not go for his gun. His right hand, a calloused, heavy fist, connected with Slevin's mouth. The sound was a dull, wet crack, like a boot stomping a rotten gourd. Slevin was unconscious before he hit the floor, teeth scattered on the dirty floorboards. Cobb, his friend, yelped and fumbled for his pistol. Weston grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped, and slammed his own elbow into Cobb's nose, driving him back against the bar. The saloon erupted. The other 3 men, startled, jumped in. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. Weston moved with a brutal, economic violence that spoke of battlefields and desperation. He broke a chair over one man's back. He threw another through the front window, the frame and glass exploding onto the street. He hit the bartender with a whiskey bottle, and the man slid to the floor in a heap of broken glass. Weston turned back to Slevin, who was moaning, and was about to haul him to his feet. Hail! The voice was Mara's. She stood in the ruined doorway, breathless, her hair flying, terror in her eyes. Weston, stop! They'll hang you! Behind her, Sheriff Gable pushed through, his pistol drawn. Hold it! Hale, right there! You are under arrest! Weston froze. He was breathing like a winded bull, his knuckles split and dripping blood onto the floor. He looked at the sheriff, and for a half-second, his body tensed, his hand twitching toward his own holstered gun. He was about to make a mistake that would end his life. Weston, please! Mara ran to him. She grabbed his arm, her small, desperate hands closing over his bloody fist. Please, come home. Her touch, her voice, broke the red fever. The rage vanished, leaving him shaking and cold. He fell, Weston said, his voice ragged. They all fell, Gable said dryly, looking at the wreckage. The saloon looked like a cyclone had hit it. You've caused, I'd say, $200 in damages, not to mention Slevin's teeth in Cobb's wrist. Lyle Horn appeared, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, his eyes glittering with triumph. See, Sheriff? This is the animal she's been harboring. A violent deserter, a menace. I want him locked up, and I want her run out of town for bringing this on us. I can't lock him up without a witness saying he started it, Gable said, clearly unhappy. And I'd wager my badge Slevin did, but I can lock you up for the damages. Hale, you got $200? No, Weston said. I'll pay for it, Mara said, her voice shaking but firm. With what? Lyle scoffed. You're broke. I'll pay with my mule. Obadiah, he's worth that. Take him. Weston's head snapped toward her. She was offering her last working animal, her last bit of hope for the farm. Gable sighed, scrubbing his face. No, Mrs. Klein, I'm not taking your mule. I'm not a thief. He looked at Weston, his expression hard. Get out of my town. Hale, both of you. Just get out. You pay for that window when you can. And if you ever ride in here like this again, I don't care who started it. I will put you in a cell and throw away the key. Mara didn't wait. She grabbed Weston's arm and pulled him, dragging him from the saloon. They walked past the gathering, staring, hostile crowd, past Lyle Horn's victorious smirk. They mounted the roan, Mara sitting in front of him, and rode away from the town that had declared war on them. The ride back was silent, filled with the heavy, cold weight of defeat. Weston's rage was gone, replaced by a bitter self-loathing. He had played right into Horn's hand. He had confirmed every rumor. He had made it worse. Mara was rigid in front of him, her body a single, tight knot of humiliation. When they got back, he went to the gate. He took the lye soap, the kerosene, and a stiff brush, and he began to scrub the tar. It took over an hour. The tar resisted, smeared, but finally began to fade. It left a dark, ugly stain, a scar on the wood. His knuckles, already split, were now raw and bleeding from the lye. Night fell. The sky, which had been a clear, bruised blue, turned a heavy, dark gray. A cold front was moving in. The wind picked up, howling from the north. Thunder rumbled, distant and low, like artillery. They were inside the sod house. Weston was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. Mara was on the stool by the hearth, shivering, though it wasn't cold. The first drops of rain hit the roof, sounding like pebbles. Then the sky opened. It was not a gentle rain, but a driving, angry torrent. The wind shrieked, and the house, which had withstood the duster, felt frail. A steady drip, drip, drip began in the corner by the door. A leak. That sound, the sound of her home, her fortress, failing her. It was the final betrayal. Mara let out a small, broken whimper. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. "He's won," she whispered. "Lyle? The town. They've won. They'll take the farm. I have 4 days left." "I'll get the money," Weston said, his voice hollow. He looked at his bloody hands. "I'll ride to Cheyenne. Get work on the railroad. I'll earn it." "In 4 days?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "They'll never let you out of the county. Gable will arrest you. Lyle will see to it. And I'll be what they wrote on the gate. That's all that's left for me." She stood up, and all the strength, all the willow bend and flint, was gone. She was a child, lost in a storm. She stumbled toward him, the only other living soul in the world. She didn't just lean on him. She collapsed against his chest, her face burrowing into his dirty, sweat-stained shirt. And she began to sob. It was not the quiet, dignified grief of the windmill. It was a raw, primal wail of defeat. A storm inside to match the one outside. Her whole body shook with the force of it. "Don't take my home," she cried, her words muffled against his heart. "Please, don't let them. It's all I have left. It's all I have." Weston froze. This was the moment he had dreaded. This was the intimacy that sent him running. He could feel her shaking, her smallness, the hot, wet flood of her tears soaking through his shirt. The ghosts of Texas, of the dead child, screamed at him to pull away, to walk out the door, to keep moving. But his own words, spoken by this same fire, echoed back. "If I touch you, it's because I mean to stay." His arms, his bloody, lye-stung, aching arms, came up and wrapped around her. He held her. He pulled her tight, anchoring her against the sound of the rain, the howl of the wind, the steady, rhythmic drip of the leak. He held her, his hand burying itself in her hair, his chin resting on the top of her head. He breathed in the scent of her, soap and fear and wood smoke. He let her cry until the storm inside her passed, until the sobs quieted into ragged, exhausted shudders. He pulled back, just enough to see her face. It was a wreck, swollen, red, and streaked with tears. She looked broken. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was a kiss of protection, a seal, a promise. She looked up at him, her gray eyes vast and empty, searching his for an answer that didn't exist. He cupped her face in his hands. His rough, torn palms framed her jaw. He looked at her, this woman who was as much a pariah as he was. A solution, stark and insane and absolutely necessary, presented itself. It was the only move left. He lifted her chin. "Be my wife," he whispered. She blinked, the tears stopping. "What?" "Be my wife," he repeated, his voice urgent, rough with the truth of it. Not tomorrow, not in a church, tonight. A massive clap of thunder shook the house, rattling the tin cups on the shelf. Mara stared at him, uncomprehending. This wasn't a proposal. It was a battle strategy. "The law," he said, the idea taking full shape as he spoke. "Agnew, the auction. They are seizing the land from Mara Klein, Silas's widow. If you are Mrs. Hale, if this land is held by a husband, it changes the debt. It changes everything. They can't just seize a married woman's property the same way. They'll have to file new papers. They'll have to fight me." They'll say," she stammered. "They'll say it's a sham. They'll say what they wrote." "Let them say it," he growled, his eyes fierce. "We'll be saying it too. We'll be saying we're married. Let them choke on the word. It's a legal fight. Mara, it buys us time." She looked at him, this violent, quiet stranger, this deserter. He was offering her his name, the only thing he had left to give. It was as tarnished as hers, and together they might make something solid. "Tonight," she whispered. It was not a question. It was an acceptance. He nodded. The pact was made. The air in the room was electric. The storm outside, the tension inside. He released her face, but she did not move away. She looked at the small cot in the corner. Her marriage bed. Her widow's bed. "If I am your wife," she said, her voice so low he barely heard it over the rain, "I will not be a wife in name only. I will not be a lie." He looked at her. This was her choice. This was not his proposal. This was her amendment. She was not collapsing. She was sealing the bargain. He didn't speak. He just watched her. Her hands, shaking, came up to the high collar of her dress. She began to unbutton it. He moved, closing the small distance between them. He lifted his own bloody hands and, his fingers thick and clumsy, he helped her. The dress slouched from her shoulders, pooling in a dark circle at her feet. She stood before him in her thin chemise, shivering in the firelight. He reached out and touched her shoulder, his fingers tracing the line of her collarbone. He bent and lifted her into his arms. He carried her the few feet to the cot and laid her down on the patchwork quilt. He turned and undressed, the firelight playing over his own scarred body, the gun belt, the boots, the shirt, stiff with dried blood. He stood before her, his history written on his skin. He lay down beside her, pulling the quilt over them both. The sod house felt like a raft in a storming, black ocean. He kissed her, on the mouth. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of raw, shared desperation. It tasted of salt and whiskey and blood. She kissed him back, her hands gripping his shoulders, her broken nails digging into his skin. This was not tenderness. It was a collision. It was the fury of the saloon, turned inward. It was two people, pushed to the very edge, clinging to each other as the world tried to sweep them away. It was the sound of the thunder, the lash of the rain, the rasp of their breath. It was a drowning woman's grip on a floating piece of wreckage. It was a claim. He was claiming her, and she was claiming him. It was a defiant, desperate yes against the town's resounding no. It was an act of survival. Then, as the first wave of fury passed, it changed. His hands, which had been gripping, gentled. Her breath, which had been desperate, softened. He moved inside her, and they both stilled. A moment of profound, terrifying connection. The storm outside raged, but in the small, warm, fire-lit room, they moved together. It was no longer a fight. It was a rhythm, a promise sealed in the flesh. It was release. When it was over, they lay tangled, slick with sweat. The thunder had moved on, rumbling in the distance. The rain had softened to a steady, quiet murmur. He held her, his face buried in her hair, her hand flat against his chest. feeling his heart hammer. They had survived. The next morning, the world was washed clean. The air was cold and bright. Weston rose first, made coffee, and stoked the fire. When Mara woke, he handed her a cup. Their eyes met. There was no shame. There was only a stark, quiet understanding. "We ride to town," he said. "I know." She dressed in her only good dress, the dark blue wool. He saddled the roan. He lifted her up, then mounted behind her. They rode as one. The town stared. They saw the widow, sitting on the drifter's horse, his arms around her waist. They walked straight into the town hall. Mr. Agnew looked up, and his jaw dropped. "We need a marriage license," Weston said. A what?" Agnew stammered. "You heard me," Weston said. "We're getting married now." "But the law requires a waiting period. A preacher!" "I'm the justice of the peace," Sheriff Gable said. He was standing in his office doorway, looking tired. "It's in the county charter. I can do it." "Sheriff, you can't," Agnew bleated. "Lyle Horn will—" "Lyle Horn doesn't run this county," Gable said. He looked at Weston's bruised knuckles, then at Mara's calm, defiant face. He sighed. "Fill out the certificate. Agnew." Shaking, Agnew pulled the ledger. "Name: Weston Hale. Name: Mara Klein." Gable stepped forward. "Do you—" "Weston Hale, take this woman, Mara Klein, to be your lawfully wedded wife." Weston looked at Mara. "I do." "Do you, Mara Klein, take this man, Weston Hale, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mara lifted her chin. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife. That'll be $2. Weston dropped $2 silver on the desk, his last two. He took the certificate. "Now, Agnew," he said, his voice cold iron. "About my wife's property. I'll be handling the taxes from here on. You can draw up the new deed, under the name Hale. We'll be back tomorrow to sign it." He folded the paper, offered his arm to Mara, and together, husband and wife, they walked out into the hostile sunlight. The news of the marriage struck Redemption Creek with the force of a dry thunderstorm. It was not just gossip. It was a judgment. By the time Weston and Mara had ridden the 5 miles back to the farm, the ink on the certificate barely dry, the entire town knew the act performed in the cold, legal confines of the sheriff's office was seen as something wild, indecent, and deeply defiant. In the Last Chance saloon, the talk was low and angry. Slevin, his mouth swollen and missing 2 front teeth, lisped his fury. He married her? After what he did? He's laughing at us. At the whole town." In the Mercantile, the women's whispers were sharp as stitching needles. "Well, Mrs. Abernathy, the preacher's wife, declared, pulling a bolt of calico straight. That confirms the type of woman she is. She sold her virtue to save her land. She's no better than a common—" The unspoken word hung in the air, thick and foul as pine tar. Lyle Horn, however, did not whisper. When Mr. Agnew nervously confirmed the filing of the marriage certificate, Horn's face went a dark, mottled purple. He had been outmaneuvered, legally blocked by a $2 piece of paper and a broken-down deserter. "He thinks this changes anything?" Horn's voice was a low growl. He slammed his fist on Agnew's desk, rattling the inkwell. "He thinks his name on her deed means a damn thing to me. I own this county, and I will have that land. Gable can't protect them forever." He stormed from the office, his mind turning from legal seizure to more permanent solutions. The marriage had not saved Mara. It had merely signed her death warrant alongside Weston's. For Mara, the isolation was immediate and absolute. Her old life, the one she had clung to as Silas's widow, was gone. There was no more pity. There was only scorn. She rode into town 2 days later. She had to. They were out of coffee and kerosene. Weston had insisted on coming, his presence a silent, looming guard. "I am your husband," he had said, his voice flat. It was not a statement of affection. It was a statement of fact. "I ride with you." They rode in, not on one horse, but two, the roan and her mule. Obadiah. The townspeople treated them like an infection. Sarah Jensen, a woman who had once sat with Mara for 2 straight nights by a sickbed, saw her coming, grabbed her young son's hand, and crossed the dusty street to avoid breathing the same air. At the mercantile, Mr. Henderson sold them their goods, but he took their coin and dropped it into a separate drawer, as if it were contaminated, as they were packing the supplies onto the mule. One of Horn's ranch hands, Cobb, the one whose wrist Weston had snapped, swaggered over. His arm was in a dirty sling. "Look at that! Boys!" Cobb called out to his friends, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "The happy couple. Tell me, Mrs. Hale," he sneered. "Was the drifter worth the price? Did you get a good night's work for those 40 acres? Before Mara could even flinch, Weston was off his horse. He didn't say a word. He just backhanded Cobb across the face. The sound was a sharp, flat crack. Cobb crumpled to the boardwalk, spitting blood. "Weston, no!" Mara cried, grabbing his arm. Sheriff Gable was out of his office in an instant, his hand on his pistol. "Hale, I warned you. I warned you what would happen if you started trouble in my town again." "He didn't start it," Mara said, her voice shaking but fierce. "You heard him. He insulted me. He insulted my husband." Gable looked at Cobb, who was groaning. He looked at Horn's other men, who were watching with cold, eager eyes. He looked at Weston, whose hand was resting on the butt of his own gun, his face a mask of cold fury. "I don't care who started it," Gable said, his voice weary. "You can't do this, Hale. You're making it worse for her. Now get out, both of you, and don't come back. Next time, I don't care what the reason is, you will go in that cell." Weston held Gable's gaze, his jaw tight. Finally, he turned, grabbed the roan's reins, and swung into the saddle. He looked down at Mara. "Let's go home." They rode back in a suffocating, angry silence. The world had shrunk to the 40 acres of red dirt. They were prisoners on their own land. That night, the small sod house felt like a trap. The single room, with her cot and his bedroll, was charged with unspoken fear and resentment. Weston was standing by the boarded-up window, staring out at the darkness. "We have to leave, Mara," he said, his voice low. She stopped scrubbing the pot from their meager supper. "What?" "We leave. We ride out. Tonight. We head north. To Montana. Or Oregon. Somewhere they don't know us. I can find work. I can build you a proper house. A timber house." She turned, her hands dripping soapy water. "Run? That's your answer?" "This isn't a fight," he said, turning to face her. "This is an execution. You saw Gable. He won't protect us. Horn has the whole town. He'll just keep sending men like Cobb. Or worse, this land isn't worth dying for." "This land," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is not yours to bargain with." "I am your husband. Your life is my concern." "My life?" She laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "My life is this land, and you don't know why. You think I'm just stubborn. You think this is about Silas." "Isn't it?" "No," she said, and her anger seemed to drain away, leaving a core of old, hard grief. "This was my father's homestead, Samuel Klein. He was here before the town was even named. He was here when this was just Indian territory. He and my mother cut this sod. They built this house with their bare hands." She walked to the small wooden chest that held her few treasures. She took out a folded, yellowed deed, its edges brittle. "He broke this land. He poured his life into it. And then the railroad came, and the banks. He had one bad year, a drought, just like this one. He borrowed money to buy seed. $100. From a bank in Cheyenne. The same bank Lyle Horn does business with. She looked at Weston, her gray eyes burning in the lamplight. He couldn't pay it back. They sent a man, a lawyer just like Agnew. And they took it. They foreclosed on him for $100 debt. They drove my father and my mother off this land at gunpoint. They called him a squatter. He died 2 years later, broken and shamed, working for wages in a stockyard. She held the old deed out. Silas, for all his faults. Silas knew that story. He knew what this place meant to me. He spent every cent he had to buy this land back from that bank. It was his wedding gift to me. He gave me back my father's name. He gave me back my home. She closed her hand, crushing the old paper. So you can ride to Oregon, Weston. You can run, just like you did in Texas. But I am not my father. I will not be driven off. I will not die of shame in some stranger's town. I will die here, on my land, my home. Weston looked at her, and, for the first time, he truly saw the woman he had married. She was not a victim. She was not a widow. She was a daughter, fighting a war her father had lost. He had offered his name to protect her, but she had a name of her own, one she'd valued more than her life. He walked over and gently took the deed from her fist. Unfolding it, he looked at the old signature. Samuel Klein. You're right, he said quietly. It's not about Silas. He folded the paper and handed it back to her. We stay, and we fight. His words settled the matter. But Weston knew this was not a fight he could win with his fists in the middle of town. Horn was a snake, and you don't fight a snake in the open. You wait for it to crawl out from its rock. He became a creature of the night. For 3 nights, he left Mara in the barred house and slipped away on foot. He moved through the gullies and sagebrush, his body just another shadow in the high desert moonscape. He watched Horn's ranch. He was not a soldier anymore. He was a scout. He was hunting. On the 3rd night, his patience paid off. He was lying on a ridge overlooking Horn's ranch house. It was well past midnight. The town dark, the world silent. A lone rider approached, not from the town, but from the east. The man was a stranger, lean and dressed in dark clothes. He rode a fast, strong-looking bay, and he wore his gun low, tied down. This was not a ranch hand. The man dismounted. Horn himself opened the front door, letting the man into his study. Weston crept closer, his stockinged feet making no sound on the hard-packed earth. He got low, beneath the sill of the open study window. He could smell Horn's cigar smoke and the sharp tang of whiskey. Simple matter. Horn was saying, 2 squatters on land I've already purchased. They're trespassing. A new voice spoke, cold and flat as a shovel. Trespassers. You want 'em moved or you want 'em planted? I want them gone, Horn said. Wiped out. This man she married. He's a violent drifter, a deserter, prone to drink. I want a fire, a terrible accident. He gets drunk, hits her, burns the whole place down, with both of them inside. A tragedy. There was a pause. The cold voice spoke again. A fire is clean, but it's expensive. That's a double job. My price is $500. Coin. Half now. Half when I see smoke. 500? Horn choked. That's robbery. My price, the man said, his voice unchanged. Or you can go down there and try to move that husband of hers yourself. I saw what he did to Cobb and Slevin. Your choice. Weston heard the sound of a heavy desk drawer opening, the jingle of coins. This is $250, Horn said. You get the other half when the job is done. I want it done by the end of the week. It'll be done tomorrow night, the gunman said. I don't like to wait. Weston didn't wait to hear more. He backed away, melting into the shadows, his blood like ice in his veins. He ran the 3 miles back to the farm, his mind racing. This was no longer a threat. It was a timeline. They had one day. He tapped on the window, the signal they'd agreed on. Mara unbarred the door, her face pale, a shotgun in her hands. She saw his expression and her grip tightened. "He's hired a gunman," Weston said, his voice flat, stepping inside. "A professional. He's paying him to burn the house down. With us in it, tomorrow night." Mara sat down hard on the cot, the shotgun resting across her lap. The color drained from her face. This was it, the end. "We go to Gable," she whispered. "And say what?" Weston said, pacing the small room. "That I was hiding under Horn's window? It's my word against his. Horn owns Gable. He'll laugh in our faces. We're alone in this." Mara looked at her father's deed, which she had pinned to the sod wall. "So we wait for him. We wait here to be burned alive." "No," Weston said. The hunter in him was now fully awake. "We don't wait. We use the one thing we have." "What's that, a broken mule and a lame horse?" "This land," Weston said, tapping the wall. "He's coming here, to our home. We'll be waiting for him." But Mara was shaking her head. A new, cold anger was rising in her. She was tired of being hunted. She was tired of hiding behind boarded-up windows and barred doors. "No," she said, standing up. "Not here. Not in the dark. I am done being the widow whore hiding in her mud house. Today is market day. Horn will be there, in the light, in front of everyone." "Mara, that's insane," Weston said, grabbing her arm. "You'll be killed." "He called me a liar. He called me a whore," she said, her voice shaking with a terrible, contained rage. "He is paying a man to murder me. I will not die hiding. I will face him, in the sun. I want every person in this town to see me accuse him." "They won't believe you." "I don't care," she said, pulling her arm free. "But he will know, and they will all hear the truth. I am done being afraid." She grabbed her shawl, checked the loads in the shotgun, and walked out the door. Weston stood frozen for a second, stunned by the raw courage of this woman. She was walking into the lion's den, cursing. He grabbed his rifle and his pistol, and followed her. The market square was bustling. Ranchers, townsfolk, and their families gathered to trade goods and gossip. Lyle Horn was at the center of it, by the cattle pens, holding court, laughing loudly, the picture of a man who owned the world. The crowd parted as Mara walked through. The laughter and talk died. All eyes turned to this lone, pale woman, walking with a shotgun resting in the crook of her arm. Weston was 5 feet behind her. His duster pushed back, his hands loose, his eyes scanning the crowd, the rooftops, the alleys, watching for the gunman. Mara walked straight up to Lyle Horn. "Horn," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the silence. He turned, his smile fixed, though his eyes narrowed. "Well, Mrs. Hale, come to the market. Have you, looking for a new husband already?" The men around him chuckled nervously. "I know what you hired," Mara said, her voice ringing out. Horn's smile vanished. "You're drunk, woman. Go home." He started to turn away. "You hired a man to burn my house down," she continued, her voice rising, "with me and my husband inside it." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was not slander. This was a mortal accusation. Horn turned back, his face crimson. "You are insane. You're a hysterical, lying—" "Am I?" Mara took a step closer. "You drove Silas Klein into that mine. You pushed him with debt until he broke. You killed him just as sure as if you'd shot him. And when you couldn't steal his land from his widow, you painted whore on my gate. And when that didn't drive me out, you hired a killer for $500. "That is a lie," Horn roared, lunging at her, his hand raised to strike her down. Weston moved. He didn't draw his gun. He stepped in front of Mara, catching Horn's thick wrist in a grip of iron. The force of the blow stopped, inches from Mara's face. The entire square was frozen. "You will not," Weston said, his voice a low, lethal promise. Touch my wife. Horn struggled. His face contorted in a mask of rage and humiliation. But he could not break Weston's grip.
She's crazy,
Horn yelled to the crowd.
This deserter has poisoned her. Sheriff, arrest this man.
She's not crazy, Weston said, his voice carrying to every person in the square. She's just the only one here brave enough to say what you all know. You're a thief, Horn. You're a coward who pays other men to do his killing, and your time is done. He shoved Horn's arm back, pushing the larger man off balance. Horn stumbled back into a water trough, soaking himself to the waist. A few nervous laughs broke out, then were quickly silenced. Horn stood up, dripping, his dignity shattered. His face was a terrifying, murderous mask.
You're dead,
Horn shrieked, pointing a wet, shaking finger.
Both of you, you're dead!
Weston ignored him. He turned his back on the richest, most powerful man in the county. He looked at Mara, who was pale but breathing hard, her eyes blazing. In front of the entire town, in front of the hostile, staring crowd, he reached down and took her hand, his fingers laced through hers. It was not a gesture of protection. It was a gesture of allegiance. He didn't pull her. He didn't lead her. They stood as equals. Then, together, they turned and walked away from the market. The crowd parted for them. A sea of silent, stunned faces. They mounted their horses and rode out of town, leaving Lyle Horn standing alone, dripping in the ruins of his reputation. They didn't speak the entire ride home. The shared danger, the public declaration, had forged a bond between them deeper than any vow. When they reached the farm, the sun was low, bathing the dry fields in a fragile, golden light. The beauty of it was painful, a reminder of what they were about to fight for. Weston went straight to the barn. He was not a farmer now. He was a soldier preparing a battlefield. He checked the angles from the loft, the shadows by the stalls. Mara found him there. In the fading light, he was checking his rifle, the oiled mechanism clicking with grim finality. He'll come tonight, she said. It wasn't a question. He'll come, Weston agreed, not looking up. You should be in the house, in the cellar. No, Mara said. She walked over to him, standing in the middle of the barn. I am done hiding. I faced him. I'll face his man, too. Weston finally stopped, looking at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unbending resolve. He saw the woman who had accused her enemy in public, the woman who would die for her father's land. That night, she said, her voice soft, the night of the storm, it was for the land. It was a bargain, to survive. I know, he said. I need you to know, she continued, stepping closer, that it is not for the land, and it is not for survival. She reached out and laid her hand on his, covering the hand that held the rifle. His skin was warm. It's for you. She took the rifle from his grip and set it carefully against the stall. Then she took his hands. They were rough, calloused, the knuckles still scarred from the fight in the saloon. She raised them, and gently, she kissed his knuckles. Weston's breath hitched. She didn't let go of his hands. She turned and led him, not to the house, but to the ladder that led to the hayloft. She climbed, and he followed, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't in the market square. In the loft, the last rays of the sun streamed through the cracks in the barn wood, illuminating floating specks of dust, turning the mounds of dry, sweet-smelling hay into hills of gold. She turned to face him. That night, she whispered, you said you wouldn't touch me just because we were lonely. You said if you did, it was because you meant to stay. I'm still here, he said, his voice rough. I'm here too. She stepped into his arms. This was no collapse. This was not desperation. This was a choice. Her arm slid around his neck, and she pulled his head down. The kiss was not the bruising, frantic collision of the storm. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a kiss of terrifying, profound honesty. It tasted of dust and fear and a shared, defiant future. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight. The fear, the gunman, the town, the impending night, it all dissolved. There was only the warmth of her body, the softness of her mouth. His hands moved, unbuttoning her dress, his fingers tracing the line of her shoulder. Her hands fumbled with his shirt, pulling it open. They sank down into the deep, warm bed of hay. This was not the silent, desperate act of two strangers. This was a claiming. It was tender, his mouth moving over her throat, her collarbone, and it was wild. Her hands gripping his back, her body meeting his, an equal in strength, an equal in desire. They came together in the golden, dying light. Two scarred people, a husband and a wife, finding a fierce, fragile life in the very heart of their fear. Outside, the Wyoming sky turned a deep, cold purple, and the stars began to appear, sharp and cold as the night to come. But in the warmth of the hay, they held on to each other, a defiant, living, breathing home. The hay in the loft was a bed of gold, but it offered no rest. The sweetness of their coming together, the profound, terrifying intimacy, was a brief, defiant spark against the encroaching dark. The night was cold and absolute, the stars overhead looking like chips of ice. They did not sleep. They waited. Weston dressed, his movements economical, his senses stretched to their limit. He was a soldier again, preparing for an ambush on his own land. He checked his rifle, his pistol. Mara dressed alongside him, her face pale but her eyes steady. She was no longer a victim. She was a combatant. She took the shotgun, its weight familiar in her hands. "He'll come for the house first," Weston said, his voice a low rasp in the quiet barn. "That's what Horn paid for. A fire." "We won't be in it," Mara said. "No, we'll be in the rocks by the windmill. It's the high ground. We can see the house, the barn, the whole property. He'll have to cross open ground to get to either."
"What about the horses?"
Mara asked, her gaze turning to the roan and Obadiah in their stalls. "If he sets the barn—" Weston's jaw tightened. She was right. The animals were their only way out. "I'll move them. There's a gully, 100 yards west, deep enough to hide them from the trail. They'll be safe from the fire." "I'll go with you," she said, picking up the shotgun. "No." His voice was iron. "You go to the rocks. Now, take my rifle. You're a better shot at a distance." He passed her the heavy Winchester. "I'm a target when I'm leading them. I'll draw his fire. You'll be the one to end this. Go." She looked at him, at the absolute trust in his eyes. He was giving her the better weapon. He was trusting her with his life. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She took the rifle, slipped out of the barn, and melted into the shadows, moving toward the dark shape of the windmill. Weston took a breath. He slung his pistol belt low on his hips. He opened the stall. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the roan, taking its bridle. He grabbed Obadiah's lead. This was the most dangerous part. He was exposed, a man with his hands full. He led the animals out of the relative safety of the barn. The night air was deathly still. He could hear the clank, clank, clank of the windmill, a lonely, rhythmic heartbeat in the dark. He made it 10 yards, 20. He was in the open, halfway between the barn and the house. The world exploded. It was not a sound. It was a pressure, a white-hot flash of light, and a noise like the sky splitting open. The rifle crack echoed a split second later. Weston felt a sledgehammer slam into his left shoulder, spinning him around. The force threw him to the ground. The roan screamed, a high, terrified sound, rearing and pulling free. Obadiah brayed in panic. "Weston!" Mara's scream tore through the night from the rocks. Weston rolled, his left arm a useless, searing agony. Blood, hot and fast, was pouring down his chest. He ignored the pain, his training taking over. He drew his pistol with his right hand, his eyes scanning the dark. The shot had come from the creek bed. A second shot kicked up dirt where his head had been. The gunman was good. He was calm. Weston fired twice, aiming at the muzzle flash, the sound of his Colt cannon loud in the night. He heard a curse, the sound of a man scrambling for better cover. He had made him move.
Stay down,
He roared at Mara. He tried to push himself up, but his left side gave way. A wave of dizziness, cold and black, washed over him. The blood was gushing. Not pumping, gushing. He was hit bad. He was going to bleed out in his own yard. He saw movement, not from the creek bed, from the rocks. It was Mara. She was running toward him, the shotgun in her hands.
Get back,
He yelled, his voice already weak.
The rifle! Use the rifle!
A third bullet sang past her head. She didn't even flinch. She was a pale ghost, a fury, running straight into the gunfire. She reached him, dropped to her knees, and grabbed the front of his shirt with one hand.
Get up,
She hissed, her voice a snarl.
get up, husband. You are not dying here.
She hauled him up. The pain was a whiteout. He staggered, his full weight leaning on her small, strong frame.
The house.
She grunted, her arm around his waist, his useless arm slung over her shoulder. Another shot, another miss. The gunman was hurrying now, unnerved by her impossible charge. They stumbled, a grotesque, two-headed creature, toward the sod house. It was the longest 30 yards of his life. Mara kicked the door open, dragged him inside, and slammed it shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar. They were in total darkness. The only sound was Weston's ragged, wet breathing and the drip of his blood onto the hard-packed earth floor.
He's hit Mara.
Weston whispered. He was going cold. He's hit bad.
No,
She said. Her voice was calm, terribly calm.
you are not dying.
She lit the kerosene lamp. The small, greasy flame illuminated a butcher's shop. Blood was everywhere. His shirt was soaked, the front of her dress stained black with it. He slumped against the wall, leaving a dark smear. She ripped his shirt open, her hands quick, practical. The wound was high on his shoulder, a small, dark hole in the front. But the blood, it was too much.
The cellar.
She said, her eyes meeting his. Mara, he'll burn the house. We'll be trapped.
He has to get close to burn it.
She said, her logic cold and clear. And he'll think we're in here, wounded. He'll wait. He'll wait for daylight, or for you to bleed out. He won't risk coming in after me. She nodded toward the shotgun she'd leaned by the door. This is the only place. He can't shoot us through the ground. She pulled at the heavy plank trap door in the corner, the one that led to the root cellar. It grated open, revealing a square of blackness that smelled of damp earth, potatoes, and winter.
Get in,
She commanded. He couldn't. He tried to move, but his legs were water. She put her shoulder under his good arm and half lifted, half dragged him, lowering him into the dark. He tumbled onto the cold dirt floor below. She grabbed the lamp, a jug of water, and her sewing box, the one with the heavy shears and needles, and dropped them down. Then she pulled the heavy trapdoor shut from below, plunging them into a suffocating, earthy blackness. He heard her strike a match. The lamp flared, illuminating a tiny, cramped space, no more than 6 feet square. The low ceiling was held up by thick timber beams. Bins of withered potatoes and carrots lined one wall. It was cold.
All right,
She said, her voice shaking for the first time. Let's see it. She cut the rest of his shirt away. The wound was ugly. The bullet had gone in the front, and she found when she turned him, it had not come out the back. It was inside him, somewhere in the thick muscle and bone of his shoulder. It's in deep, she whispered.
Just leave it.
He panted. The pain was a living thing, clawing at him. "It will poison you," she said. She took a rag from a pile of clean ones she'd stored, uncorked the whiskey bottle, and poured a generous amount onto the cloth. "This will hurt." She pressed the whiskey-soaked rag to the wound. Weston screamed, a raw, muffled sound, his body arching off the floor.
Now,
She said, her face a pale, determined mask in the lamplight.
bite this.
She handed him a strip of thick leather from Silas's workbench. He put it between his teeth. She took her pair of kitchen shears, the ones she used for jointing chickens, and sterilized them in the lamp flame, the metal hissing. "Hold still! Weston!" He had never known such agony. He felt the cold metal probe the raw, open wound. He felt her fingers, surprisingly strong, digging into his flesh, searching. He bit down on the leather, the taste of it filling his mouth, his body convulsing. He was back in Texas, in the field hospital, the sound of the saws, the screaming. "I have it," he heard her say, as if from a great distance. It's lodged against the bone." He felt a terrible, grating pull, a pop, and then a new liquid wave of fire as she poured the rest of the whiskey directly into the hole. He passed out. He woke and it was dark. He was burning. A terrible, consuming fire was in his blood. He was shivering, his teeth chattering, but his skin was on fire. "Mara," he rasped. "I'm here." Her voice, cool and calm. From the darkness, a match scraped. The lamp was relit. She was sitting against the far wall, the shotgun across her lap, watching him. Her face was streaked with dirt and his dried blood. "You have the fever, from the wound." "Water." She crawled over, lifted his head, and held the tin cup to his lips. The water was metallic and cold. "How long?" he asked. "A day," she said. "Maybe more. It's night again. I heard him walking around. He's waiting."
The horses. "They ran. I pray they ran far. He didn't get them."
He lapsed back into delirium. The cellar became a living nightmare. He was in the Comanche village, the child's face staring at him, her eyes wide. He was in the saloon, Slevin's broken teeth spinning on the floor. He saw Lyle Horn's face, laughing. Through it all, there was Mara. When he thrashed, her small, strong hands held him down. "Be still, Weston, be still." When he burned, her cool, damp rag was on his forehead. When he shivered, her own body was beside his, her warmth seeping into him, a living, breathing anchor in the fiery sea of his fever. She was his prisoner and his warden. Once a day, she would strain, push the trapdoor open a crack, and listen. The world above was silent. She would slip out, a shadow in her own home, to get water from the well, to see if the gunman was still there. Each time, she returned, her face grimmer.
He's watching,
She'd whisper, sliding the bar back on the cellar door.
He hasn't left. He's just waiting. He knows we're in here. He's waiting for us to starve, or for you to die.
On the third day, the fever broke. Weston woke, his body feeling like it had been beaten with hammers, but his mind was clear. He was soaked in sweat. He was weak, but he was alive. Mara was asleep, sitting up, her head slumped against the potato bin, the shotgun still across her lap. The lamp was guttering, the oil almost gone. He looked at her. Her face was hollowed, dark circles under her eyes. She was filthy, her hair matted with dirt and his blood. She had not slept, not really. In 3 days, she had fought for him, protected him, and kept him alive, all while a killer sat yards above their heads. He understood, in that moment, what she had meant in the hayloft.
This is for you.
"Mara," he whispered. Her head snapped up, her hand instantly tightening on the shotgun. Her eyes were wild for a second, then softened when she saw him. "Weston, you're back." "You look," he said, his voice a dry croak.
terrible." A small, broken sound escaped her. It might have been a laugh or a sob. "So do you." She crawled over, felt his forehead. "The fever's gone." She offered him water. He drank, deeply this time. "He's still up there," Weston said. "He's still up there. I heard him this morning, by the well." They were quiet, the silence of the grave their only comfort. He was weak, his shoulder a dull, throbbing universe of pain, but his heart felt full. "Mara," he said, and he had to stop, his throat thick. "Don't," she whispered. "Rest." "No, I have to. If he comes, I need you to know." She waited, her gray eyes fixed on his. He looked away, at the damp earth wall. "When I was in Texas, I told you I was a deserter, that I left after the child." "I know." "That wasn't the whole truth. That's why I walked away. But it's not why I kept walking." He took a ragged breath, the confession pulling at his new wound. "I had a wife, before the war. Her name was Annabelle. She looked like a porcelain doll. Pale hair, blue eyes. I bought her a ranch. I thought I was giving her the world. I went to fight. I was gone for almost 3 years. When I came back, I was not the same man. I'd seen things. And the man who came back was not the one she'd married. He was quiet. He was hard, like me. I was 100 miles from home when I heard the rumors. I rode hard. I got to the ranch at night, my ranch. There were lights, laughter. I looked in the window, and she was there." He stopped. The memory was as sharp as Mara's shears. She was sitting on another man's lap, a cattle buyer from back east. They were drinking my whiskey. She was wearing a new silk dress. I broke the door down. He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. She wasn't even scared. She just looked at me, as if I was a stranger. She said, "You're back. I thought you were dead. I hoped you were." The man, he just laughed. She'd sold off my herd. She'd sold my land, forged my name. She'd told everyone I'd died at Shiloh. "Weston," Mara's hand came out, touching his good arm. "I didn't kill him," Weston whispered, his eyes closed. I wanted to, but I saw her. Her face. She was nothing. A hollow, pretty shell. Everything I'd fought for, everything I'd built. It was gone. It was a lie. She had betrayed me. She had erased me. So I turned around, I got on my horse, and I rode. That was when I deserted. Not from the army, from everything. From love. From ever trusting another person with my name. My home. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. The cellar was thick with his shame. "That night, in the storm, when I saw her. I saw a woman who was desperate, who would do anything to save her land. I thought you were her. I thought you were just using me." Mara was crying, quiet, steady tears that ran unchecked down her face. She wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with a terrible, profound understanding. "And now?" she whispered. "What do you see now?" He looked at her, at the blood on her face, the exhaustion in her bones, the shotgun in her lap. "I see the woman who ran into gunfire for me. I see the woman who kept me alive in the dark." He reached out with his good hand, his fingers tracing the tear track on her cheek. "I see my wife." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, a shudder passing through her. She put her hand over his. "Weston," she wept. "I don't care about Texas. I don't care about Annabelle. She was a fool. I am not her, Silas. He broke his vows to me in that mine shaft. He betrayed me with his own cowardice. We are the same. We are the survivors." She squeezed his hand, her grip fierce. "I don't need vows. Weston, I don't need pretty words about love. I just need this. Your hand, your life.
Here, with me. Just don't leave me again. Don't you dare walk away from me.
I'm not going anywhere, he said, his voice rough. If we get out of this hole. We will, she said, a new, hard edge to her voice. She wiped her tears away with a dirty hand. We will. We can't stay here. He'll just wait, and Horn will send another. We can't win here. I know, he said, the reality of their situation crashing back. My father, Mara said, her eyes becoming distant. When he lost this land, he had a friend, in Cheyenne, a man who worked in the land office, at the district court, Elias Thorne. He tried to help my father. He wrote him a letter. He said the bank's foreclosure was wrong, that it was predatory. That was the word he used. He's an old man now, but if he's still there, he's a clerk of the court. He would listen. He would know my name. A desperate, fragile hope began to dawn. Cheyenne, Weston said. That's over 100 miles. I can't ride like this. You will, Mara said, her jaw set. You'll ride. I'll get you there. We can't fight Horn here, but we can fight him in a courtroom. With the law. With our law. She touched her pocket, where she'd kept the marriage certificate. We need the horses, Weston said, and we need to get out of this cellar. They began to plan. They would wait for the darkest part of the night, just before dawn. The gunman would be cold, tired, his guard down. Mara would go out first. She would find the horses. The roan was trained. He would come for a whistle. Obadiah would follow. Weston, leaning on the shotgun as a crutch, would follow. They waited. The lamp died, plunging them back into darkness. The hours crawled by. Finally, Mara put her hand on his. It's time. She moved to the trap door. She pushed it open, slowly, an inch at a time. Silence. She slipped up, into the house, a shadow in the gloom. Weston listened, his heart in his throat. He heard her unbar the front door, heard the faint creak as it opened. Then he heard her voice, a sharp, sudden gasp. No! He smelled it at the same instant. Kerosene. Sharp and overwhelming. The gunman hadn't been waiting for them to starve. He'd been waiting for the right moment. Mara, Weston roared, trying to pull himself out of the cellar. Weston, the back, she screamed. A sound like a whoosh, and the world went orange. A wave of heat slammed down into the cellar. The gunman had poured kerosene all around the house and on the roof. Flames licked at the trap door opening. Get out, Weston yelled, pushing at her from below. Mara scrambled back. The house is going! The front! It's all fire! The sod house, dry as tinder after the long summer, was an inferno in seconds. Smoke, thick and black, poured into the cellar, choking them. The window! Weston gasped, shoving her toward the small back window. Get out! Mara ran to it, smashing the boarded-up frame with the butt of the shotgun. She looked back, her face illuminated by the fire. Not without you. I'm behind you, he lied. She didn't move. She turned and ran, not to the window, but to the small wooden chest by her cot, which was already smoldering. She ripped it open, grabbed two small things, and shoved them into the front of her dress. Mara, damn it, go! The roof groaned. A flaming beam crashed to the floor, blocking the trapdoor. Mara screamed. She ran to the window, climbed out, and fell onto the dirt outside. Gasping for air, she turned, her hands raw, to help him. Weston! He was trapped. The fire was between him and the window. He was going to burn. Go! He yelled, his voice choked with smoke. Run! No, I won't leave you. She was at the window, her hands reaching in, the flames licking at her arms. He looked at her face, a mask of terror and love in the firelight. He looked at the burning beam. He grabbed the shotgun, and with his last ounce of strength,
his good arm roaring with the effort. He shoved the beam aside. He dove, head first, through the small window, rolling onto the ground at her feet as the entire roof collapsed behind him, sending a shower of sparks and embers into the night sky. They lay on the ground, gasping, coughing, their home a roaring, blazing pyre. The gunman, a dark figure silhouetted against the flames, raised his rifle from the creek bed. He had failed to burn them, so he would shoot them. "Move!" Weston panted. Grabbing Mara, they crawled, dragging themselves into the shadows of the still-standing barn, the gunman's bullets thudding into the earth around them. The fire lit up the entire farm. Mara looked at the inferno, her face crumbling. Her father's house, her home, gone. "It's gone," she wept, her body shaking. "He took it. He finally took it all." Weston pulled her close, his one good arm holding her. "No," he said, his voice a low, hard promise, his eyes fixed on the flames. "He took a house. He didn't take your home." She looked up at him, confused. "We're your home," he said. He looked at her, his face grim. "He didn't take us." She looked at the burning wreckage. Then she reached into her dress. Her hands were burned, her knuckles raw. She pulled out 2 items. A simple, carved wooden comb, its edges darkened by the smoke, her mother's, and a folded piece of paper, scorched at the edges, but intact, their marriage certificate. She held them out, her hands shaking. "He didn't take anything," she whispered. They heard the gunman, cursing in the dark, moving closer. "Come on," Weston said, pulling her to her feet. "It's a long walk to Cheyenne." The fire was a roar, a hungry orange beast consuming their past. The gunman, hidden in the dark, was a promise of no future. Weston, his left shoulder a mass of raw, burning agony, grabbed Mara's hand.
"The gully!"
He choked, pulling her away from the barn.
"The horses, now!"
They ran, half crawling, as their home collapsed, sending a volcano of sparks into the sky. The gunman fired, the shot high and panicked, the bullet whining past them into the night. The inferno had blinded him, robbing him of his night vision. It was the only grace they were given. They scrambled into the dark, dry creek bed, the one the gunman had used for his own ambush. Weston fell, his good arm giving way. He was a dead weight. "I can't," he gasped, the blood loss making the world tilt. "You will," Mara said, her voice a low, animal snarl. She put her shoulder under his good arm and hauled him. "I did not drag you from a fire to let you die in a ditch." She was fueled by a fury that transcended fear. She pushed, pulled, and dragged him through the sagebrush, away from the burning light, until they were 100 yards away, deep in the shadows. He collapsed. "The horses," he whispered, his eyes closing.
"Stay here. Do not move."
She took the shotgun and vanished into the dark. Weston lay on the cold ground, his pistol in his good hand. Listening, he heard the distant, frantic whinny of the roan. He heard Mara's low, whistling call, a sound she used for Obadiah. It was a terrible risk. The gunman would hear it. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity. He heard the scrape of hooves on stone. Mara appeared, a ghost leading 2 other ghosts. She had them. "He's coming," she said, her voice tight. "I heard him. He's trying to circle the fire." She had to get him on the roan. It was an impossible task. He couldn't lift his own weight. "Use the shotgun," he panted. "As a crutch." She wedged the shotgun, butt down, under his armpit, using it as a lever, with her own body as a brace. She managed to haul him upright. He screamed, a raw sound that was swallowed by the crackle of the fire. He got his good foot into the stirrup and fell, rather than swung, across the saddle, clinging to the horn with his right hand. Mara scrambled onto Obadiah's bare back. "Ride north," he ordered. "Toward the mountains. He'll expect us to follow the road east to Cheyenne.
Ride north.
They kicked the animals into a desperate, stumbling run. They rode into the blackness, guided only by the cold pinpricks of the stars, leaving the orange, dying ember of their life behind them. The journey to Cheyenne was a 100-mile descent into hell. They rode for 2 days, pushing the animals, keeping to the high, broken country, avoiding every road, every ranch. Weston's wound, which Mara had stitched and bound in the dark cellar, began to poison him. The fever returned, this time with a vengeance. By the 3rd day, he was delirious, his body a rigid, burning weight on the saddle. Mara had to tie him on, his wrist lashed to the saddle horn, to keep him from falling. She was no longer a wife. She was a mule skinner, a nurse, and a hunter, all at once. Her hands, already raw from the fire, were split and bleeding from the rains and the cold. She had her mother's comb and the marriage certificate in her dress. She had the shotgun, but only 3 shells left. She had a wounded man who was dying by inches. They reached the foothills of the Laramie Mountains. The air, which had been warm in the valley, turned thin and cold. The wind was relentless. They were in the high passes when the first snow of the season began to fall. It was not a gentle snow, but a hard, stinging sleet that caked the animals' manes and turned the rocks treacherous. Weston was fading. He slumped in the saddle, his breath shallow, muttering to ghosts. "Annabelle," he whispered, his eyes rolling. "The land, you sold the land." "It's Mara," she said, her own voice raw, her lips cracked and blue. She pulled her mule alongside his roan, grabbing his chin. "Weston, look at me. It's Mara. You stay with me. You promised you wouldn't leave." His eyes focused, just for a second. He saw her, the desperation, the strength. "Not leaving," he breathed, and passed out again. She found a shallow cave, barely an overhang in the granite. Screened by wind-blasted pines, she dragged him from the horse, built a small, smoky fire with wet wood, and wrapped him in every blanket they had. The roan and the mule huddled nearby, their backs to the wind. He was going to die. The infection was spreading. The wound was swollen, purple and hot to the touch. She had no whiskey, no medicine. She had only snow and fire. She melted snow in their 1 tin cup, washing the wound as he shivered, his teeth chattering. She tore the last clean strips from her petticoat to bind it. She sat in the mouth of the cave, the shotgun across her knees, and watched the snow fall, her body numb, her heart a cold, hard stone. For 2 days, the storm raged. She kept the fire alive. She fed him sips of warm, muddy water. She lay beside him, her small body curled against his back, trying to force her life, her warmth, into his dying one. On the 4th day in the mountains, the fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear. He was skeletal, his face a mask of gray, stubbled skin. But he was alive. "Mara," he whispered. She wept, a single dry sob. You came back." "You stayed," he said. It took them 3 more days to get out of the mountains. He was weak, but he could sit his horse. They were starving, the animals gaunt. They emerged from the snow line into the wide, flat plains, and in the distance, they saw the smoke of 1,000 chimneys. Cheyenne. They rode into the territorial capital not as citizens, but as refugees. They were covered in soot, their clothes in tatters, their faces hollowed by starvation and fear. People on the boardwalk stopped and stared. They looked like something dug from a grave. They found the district courthouse, a grand, new-built brick building that seemed like a palace. Weston, leaning on Mara, his shoulder bound in dirty rags, was stopped at the door by a clerk. "This is the United States Courthouse," the clerk said. His nose wrinkled in disgust. "No vagrants." "We are not vagrants," Mara said, her voice hoarse but ringing with an authority that made the man pause. We are here to see Mr. Elias Thorne. Mr. Thorne is a very busy man. He is the chief clerk of the court. Do you have an appointment? Tell him, Mara said, standing as tall as she could, that Samuel Klein's daughter is here to see him. The clerk, annoyed, disappeared. He returned minutes later. His expression changed to one of wary curiosity. This way. Elias Thorne was a man made of paper and dust. He was small, very old, with spectacles as thick as bottle glass. He sat behind a desk piled high with ledgers. He looked at Mara, his gaze sharp. Samuel Klein's daughter, he said, his voice a dry rustle. He passed years ago. I knew your father, a good man. He was cheated. I am Mara Klein Hale, she said, and I'm being cheated too, by the same man and the same bank. His name is Lyle Horn. For 1 hour, they told the story. They told of the taxes, the intimidation, the widow whore painted on the gate. They told of the saloon fight, the forced marriage, the legal block. And then they told of the gunman, the fire, the wound. Weston sat, pale and silent, a living, breathing piece of evidence. Mara finished, and the room was silent. He hired a man to burn us alive. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice flat. He stole my father's land. Now he has burned my home to the ground. We have nowhere left to go. You are the only one who believed my father. We are asking you to believe me. She reached into her dress. She pulled out her mother's singed comb, and she pulled out the scorched, folded marriage certificate. She laid them on his desk. Thorne looked at the certificate. He looked at Weston's wound. He looked at Mara's burned, raw hands. You are not here to file a claim, Mrs. Hale, Elias Thorne said, his voice shaking with a cold, ancient anger. You are here to report an attempted murder. He stood up, slowly. The man you need to see is not me. It is Judge Harlan. The trial lasted 1 week. It was not a county affair. It was a federal case. Lyle Horn was summoned, arrogant and furious, with a high-priced lawyer from Cheyenne. He painted Mara as a hysterical, bankrupt prostitute. He painted Weston as a violent, degenerate deserter, a known troublemaker. He claimed they burned their own house to collect insurance, a claim that evaporated when the judge pointed out they had no insurance. Agnew, the town clerk, was brought in, terrified, facing a federal judge and not his creditor. His story crumbled in minutes. He confessed that Horn had pressured him, had threatened him with his own debts, to accelerate the auction. Weston, his arm in a clean sling provided by the court, took the stand. He admitted he was a deserter. He admitted he had a past. But I did not, he said, his voice steady. Lie about this. I saw him hire the gunman. I heard the price, $500. But it was Mara who won the case. She stood, not in her rags, but in a simple, dark dress Elias Thorne's wife had given her. She did not cry. She did not plead. She held up her father's old, voided deed. This, she said, is what Lyle Horn stole from my father, Samuel Klein, and this, she held up their scorched marriage certificate, is what he tried to burn, along with my husband and me. He does not see land. He sees profit. He does not see people. He sees obstacles. He took my father's life. He tried to take mine. I am just asking this court to finally make him stop. The judge looked at Horn, at his expensive suit and his hateful, furious eyes. He looked at the two burned, scarred, but unbroken people before him. The verdict was swift. The seizure of the land was ruled illegal. A product of conspiracy and coercion, the judge voided the auction and declared the property, all 40 acres, to be legally and jointly held by Weston and Mara Hale. The delinquent taxes were to be paid, but they were given 6 months to do so. And, based on the testimony and the evidence of Weston's wound, Judge Harlan ordered the U.S. Marshals to open a full investigation into Lyle Horn and Mr. Agnew for conspiracy, bribery of a public official, and attempted murder. Lyle Horn was stunned. His face went white. He had been beaten, not by a gunman, but by a piece of paper and a woman who refused to burn. When they returned to the farm, it was nearly a month after they had fled. They had a new deed. They had their animals, whom Mara had found grazing in the high meadows. They had a small amount of money, a loan from Elias Thorne against the winter wheat crop they would plant. They rode over the rise, and Weston saw Mara's hands tighten on the reins. The farm was gone. Where the sod house had stood, there was only a black rectangular scar on the earth, filled with ashes and charred timbers. The barn was a skeleton. The only thing standing, proud and defiant, was the windmill, its vanes turning slowly in the breeze. Clank, clank, clank. Mara dismounted. She walked to the center of that black square, her feet kicking up gray ash. This was the foundation. This was her father's spot. This was her home. She stood there, and the wind whipped her hair, and she sank to her knees and wept. She cried for her father. She cried for Silas. She cried for the house she had been born in. She cried for the terror, the pain, the running. Weston got off his horse, his shoulders still aching, but his heart whole. He walked to her. He didn't speak. He just knelt in the ashes beside her. "It's gone," she sobbed, clutching a piece of charred wood. "He took it. It's all gone." Weston said nothing. He waited. When her sobs began to quiet, he reached out with his good hand. He did not touch her face. He did not pull her close. He gently took her hand, the one with the healed fire blisters, and he pressed it flat against his own chest. She looked up, confused. Her palm was flat against him. She could feel the steady, strong, rhythmic beat of his heart. Thump, 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 thump. "He didn't take it, Mara," Weston said, his voice rough. "He didn't take your home. You're touching it." She stared at him, her tear-filled eyes wide. She felt his heart, solid and alive under her hand, a new foundation. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of promise, salty with her tears, gritty with the ashes of their past. They began to rebuild, not with sod. Sod burned. They took Obadiah and the roan into the mountains, and for weeks they cut timber. He, with his one good arm, could brace and hold. She, with her wiry strength, could saw and lift. They worked as one, a single, determined unit. They built a small, simple house of pine logs. It had one room, a strong roof, and a stone fireplace. It smelled of fresh-cut wood and new beginnings. The first night they slept there, the house was empty. They had no furniture, only their bedrolls on the new-cut pine floor. They were exhausted, their bodies aching with the labor, but they were safe. The moonlight, cold and white, streamed through the new window, a real glass window Elias Thorne had given them. It illuminated Mara as she lay beside him. She turned to him. There was no fear. There was no desperation. There was no bargain. She kissed him, a slow, gentle kiss that spoke of pine wood and clear water and a long, quiet future. He kissed her back, and on the floor of the house they had built together, in the cold, clean Wyoming moonlight, they made love. It was quiet. It was tender. It was a consecration. It was the first peaceful breath of their new life. The ending was not an ending. It was a beginning. The spring came, and the corn was planted. The new house stood strong. One morning, just before the sun, Weston and Mara sat on the new porch they had built. The air was cool and clean. He held a tin cup of coffee. She held one, too. They sat in silence, not touching, but their shoulders were an inch apart. They were a single, solid line, watching the east. The sun began to rise. It sent rays of pale gold, then fiery orange, across the red land. The light touched the windmill. It illuminated the face of the man and the woman. It lit the old white scar on his temple, and it lit the new pink scars from the fire on her hands. They were not the same people who had met by the broken bridge. The darkness was still part lie of them, but it was not all of them. The light, the new, bright, painful light, was on them. Weston looked at his wife, her profile clear and strong in the dawn. She turned and looked at her husband, his eyes no longer haunted, but calm. They didn't need to speak. They had found their home. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West and share your thoughts on Mara and Weston's journey.